and 6 surrounding communities, and I am chair of the Density Commission. I am here today to go through the checklist because we were going to be hearing additional information for the commission, the Density Commission, and I will now meet our obligation. As chair of this commission, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listening contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that 1, we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously watch and listen to the meeting on Zoom, YouTube, what am I supposed to say there, and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court's website. We have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are any problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@ledge.state.nhus or call us at 603-271-3043. Yep. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. And finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please make sure that you state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during the meeting, which is required under the right to know law. So the question is, Alan, can you hear me?
75.
I just need to know who's going to call the roll.
I do not have it on me, Senator. Hold on, I can try to find it for you.
Alan, if you wish, I could just run through the tiles and then record who is here.
That would be great. Thank you very much, Ben.
Okay, Senator.
I've lost everybody. Senator Martha Fuller Clark. I am in York, Maine. I am essentially alone, except for a very nice dog. And I look forward to our meeting.
And I'm Ben Frost. I'm here in my office in Bedford, and I'm alone in this office. Representative Penasiti.
Good morning, everyone. Reed Penasiti, representing Amherst. I am currently out of the state in Pennsylvania visiting family. I'm in a home by myself. Thank you.
Chris Nato.
Chris Netto, I am alone in my Concord office.
Noah Hodgetts.
Noah Hodgetts, I'm alone in my office, in my home in Concord.
Chris Way.
Chris Way, I'm alone at my home in Bradford.
Jen Sis.
Jen Sis from Stratford Regional Planning Commission. I am in my office alone.
Keith Tebow.
Keith Tebow in Keene in my office alone.
Elliot Berry.
In my office alone in Manchester.
Representative Dolan.
Good morning. In my home in Londonderry alone.
And Alyssa, I don't believe you're a member of the commission, so we don't need to ask the question of you.
That's correct. Keith Tebow sits on the Commission for Housing Action, New Hampshire.
Okay, and I see Andrew Haddock has joined as well.
Andrew Haddock, representing NHMA. I am in the Chestertown offices, and I share the office with Gene Packard, our Assistant Tax Assessor.
Good morning, everyone. I believe that you received either yesterday or early this morning a copy of our agenda. The first thing on the agenda is that we have 3 sets of minutes to approve. They are the minutes from last week when you met on September 29th. And before that, the minutes for September 22nd. And then the minutes from March 6th, which seems like another era.
Some time ago.
I'd like a motion to approve all those minutes and then see if there are any comments for corrections or adjustments. So someone could make that motion and second it.
So moved.
Haddock moved.
I'll second that.
Thank you. So
Or
are
who
there,
se- who seconded that?
Keith?
Thank you, Keith.
great. So are there any additions or corrections?
Senator, I know that Andrew had sent to at least a couple of us some amendments to the September 22nd minutes. There were a couple of typos where his name was spelled incorrectly. My fault, I'm sorry. Andrew, I'd like some clarification on that the sentence or paragraph regarding what you said at the commission. I think what was recorded there with regard to the recommendations you had distributed in January was accurate. But had you wished to include further statements about your recounting of the Chestertown meeting in 2020?
Yes, I believe I relayed to the commission that the zoning amendment we proposed to promote workforce housing failed this year. However, the planning board is already committed to working on that and proposing it again this coming March. And I had mentioned that it had been torpedoed by local social media, and Bennett kindly offered some strategies to help with that next time around.
So I have that language and I can include that in the final minutes.
I'm certainly in favor of doing that. Are there any objections? Okay, so we will amend the minutes for September 22nd to include the spelling corrections and further comment from Andrew Haddock. Any other comments? Good morning, Jane.
Good morning.
Okay.
Representative Bolio, we have to ask you the pro forma question, where you are and who you're with.
All right. Oh, okay. I'm at my house. I am by myself in the house, but somebody's working on the porch.
Okay, so.
Madam Chair, I think we have 3 representatives. Yes, so
Yeah.
I think only 2 members of the House are voting members.
So are you saying we don't have a quorum?
Well, we have a quorum, but we have more than our share of members of the House. So there are 2 members of the House who were appointed by, I believe, by the Speaker. And my recollection is that they were Representatives Dolan and Bolio.
That is correct.
So my suggestion would be for Representative Penasidi to abstain from voting.
That's fine. We
Thank you.
value your voice.
I agree. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Ben. Good pickup.
All right. With that comment, I'd like to ask everyone to vote in favor of approving the 3 sets of minutes with the corrections to September 22nd.
And this must be by roll call.
And it has to be by roll call.
And I can call the roll if you wish.
Oh, Ben, you're so on to this morning. Thank you so much.
It's what I get paid for.
That's why I don't get paid, I guess. No. Anyway, go ahead.
Andrew,
Andrew Haddock, aye.
Chris Nato,
Aye.
Noah Hodgetts,
Aye.
Jen Sis,
I will abstain since I wasn't at those meetings.
Keith Tebow,
Aye.
Elliot Berry,
Aye.
Representative Bollier,
I was not at those meetings, so I'll abstain as well. Thank you.
Chris Way,
Aye.
Representative Dolan,
I wasn't at those meetings, but I will still vote aye.
Ben Frost votes aye, and Senator Fuller Clark.
I vote aye.
Okay, thank you.
So the minutes have been approved. I would just like to say, in reviewing all of those minutes, that we really have acquired a wealth of information. And I will figure out what is the best way to share that going forward for the commission. But I'm really grateful to all of you for your participation and for your input. And then I wanted to say, apropos of last week, I'm sorry I was not able to participate. I was double booked that morning with the energy conference, and I thank Ben very much for providing the direction. And there's a lot of recommendations that came forward, and I think that again, I'll look at how I can cast those into the final report. And I'm appreciative of that. I notice we are going to have a presentation from Ben and from Alyssa Magolan with regard to homeless issues. And then Noah, you are going to give us an update today, according to the minutes last week. Is that correct?
No, that's incorrect. On the survey stuff, yeah, that is not done yet.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry, yep.
No problem. And also, Ben, could you, before we begin with the presentation, could you talk about this presentation next week by Urban 3 and how people may be able to access that?
Certainly, Senator. Urban 3 is a planning and economic development consulting firm from Asheville, North Carolina. The principal and founder is a guy by the name of Joe Minicozy. And their approach to analysis of land use, we have found to be illuminating. What they do is they do what is called a land value per acre analysis on a parcel by parcel basis in different communities. They did this a year and a half or 2 years ago for the city of Manchester, and it revealed some interesting patterns. The objective really is to demonstrate that the types of land uses that we often associate with improving the tax base, and we hear that phrase a lot, are the large scale, call them big box, if you will, commercial developments. When in fact, from a municipal revenue standpoint, their analyses often reveals that it's the smaller scale, mixed use, small lots, small developments that yield on a value per acre basis, substantially greater benefits to municipalities. And they do this through a 3D modeling, which is it's fun to look at, but it also reveals some really interesting patterns. So recognizing that they had done this, and we were familiar with the work that they had done in Manchester and elsewhere too, Urban 3 is closely associated with a group known as Strong Towns, headed by Chuck Marone out of the Midwest. seeing what the work that they'd done in Manchester and elsewhere, we recognized that we at New Hampshire Housing recognized that there would be perhaps some significant benefit to having them do some additional work here in New Hampshire. And so we entered into an agreement with them to look at 15 different New Hampshire communities all over the state, different types of communities, cities, towns, large, small, and to do this sort of analysis on those. And they'll be presenting the results of their work at what would, so Joe would have been the keynote speaker at our annual Housing and the Economy Conference. We're not doing that for obvious reasons, but we're still going ahead with the presentation virtually. And so Joe will be doing his presentation on the 15th starting at 10 a.m. And I believe we've circulated the registration information already. I'm happy to do it again. And following on this overall presentation, Joe Minicozy will be doing smaller regional presentations with focused groups of communities, some of which are targeted to the general public, and some of which are really targeted at local decision makers.
So Ben, let me ask you, for those smaller presentations, how do they reach out and engage those communities?
That's being done in part through our collaboration with regional workforce housing coalitions. So in the Upper Valley and in the Seacoast, we're working with them, also in the Nashua area. And we've grouped these 15 communities into what we're calling peer groups. So we're doing 3 or 4 of these smaller presentations with groups of communities. So there will be outreach either from the regional workforce housing coalitions or directly from the communities themselves.
And will those presentations differ from what Joe is presenting next week?
They will differ somewhat. The presentation that Joe will be doing next week is kind of an overall view of the work that he's done in New Hampshire. And I'll note that this is the first time that Urban 3 has done this on a statewide basis. Their work up to now has been focused on individual communities. So this was a real challenge for them, and I think they've risen to it nicely. But so the presentations that will be focused on the individual communities will necessarily focus on the analyses of those specific communities. So it'll be more detailed, more granular, if you will, on a community basis than the general presentation on the 15th.
Great. Are there questions for Ben about this presentation? And anyone can register, is that correct, Ben?
Anyone can register, it is free.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. After the presentations this morning, we will look again at our agenda. We have 3 more meetings that are scheduled before November 1st. The last meeting will be designated to your approval of my report. And so we have 2 more meetings if we wish to gather additional information. Ben, I believe in the minutes you spoke about next week. Well, I'll check that and get back to you, but let's go ahead with the presentations from Elisa and Ben. Thank you.
So Alyssa, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to. Good morning. Thank you, Senator Fuller Clark and members of the commission. Thank you very much for having me this morning. My name is Alyssa Margolin. I serve as Director of Housing Action New Hampshire. And Housing Action New Hampshire is a statewide coalition of 80 organizations united around affordable housing policy and ending homelessness in New Hampshire. We've been around since 2009, and we work to improve state and federal policy so everyone in New Hampshire has a place to call home. Our focus really is around advocacy. And in fact, we were a key voice in advocating for the creation of your commission. And we're thankful for all of the work that you have done to date and all the work that you continue to do. We are represented on your commission by affordable housing developer and chief development officer at Southwestern Community Services, Keith Tebow. Senator Fuller Clark asked me to present to you today on our work around homelessness. And I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to talk about this topic. And so what I thought I would do is organize my thoughts around 3 questions for you this morning. One is, what does homelessness have to do with density? The second question is the lack of affordable housing connected to homelessness in New Hampshire? And the third question is, how can your commission help? So I will start with the first question. What does homelessness have to do with density? Well, homelessness, unfortunately, is an issue in our state. People who don't have a permanent place to live. And so in order to end the issue of homelessness, we need to provide housing. In order to provide housing, we need density as such a key ingredient in making housing affordable. We also need a willingness and openness to building supportive housing. So what is supportive housing? Supportive housing is housing with wraparound services. Not everyone who experiences homelessness needs ongoing services, but many people do. Well, you'll find among the homeless population in New Hampshire, people who have co-occurring disorders, sometimes severe mental illness, substance use disorder, a lot of trauma, and certainly a lot of victims of violence and domestic and sexual violence. So in order to be successful, they need a housing model that includes those services. As I said, density is a key ingredient to affordability. And so I thank you for all of your work around that. And so as you do your work, you make it and your policy proposals at the state and hopefully municipal levels as well, you can make it easier for us to build denser development, allowing for people to live in community. One of the things that we have seen in the pandemic is this desire to continue to live in community, right? When the pandemic first hit, we're really concerned, right? Because there's no safe place to isolate or quarantine in an emergency shelter. As everyone was trying to come to grips with a stay-at-home order, what did a stay-at-home order mean if you didn't have a home? So Housing Action New Hampshire, in partnership with a lot of our homeless services members, came together to advocate to our emergency operations center, certainly the governor's office, to say, what are we doing as a state to make sure we're keeping our most vulnerable safe? Our state stood up 3 quarantine shelters around the state. They brought in someone to the EOC specifically assigned to this population. And we worked on decompression strategies with every shelter around the state. Philanthropy was our early partner. And so New Hampshire Charitable Foundation quickly came up with a $250,000 to provide supports to before the federal money started to come in so that shelters could respond to decompression needs. And also New Hampshire Housing provided emergency support at $150,000. And then we even received Robert Wood Johnson Foundation national funding to help with this effort early on. What we saw was amazing, just folks at the local level coming together. And I know where I live in Portsmouth, our Chamber of Commerce connected our large homeless shelter here, Crossroads, with folks in the hospitality industry who had a lot of empty hotel rooms. And as a result, Crossroads was able to lease an entire wing of a hotel. It was really key to their decompression strategy and continues to be. And it was ideal because they could move food delivery services there. And this is really close to where many of the folks worked. That's right, many folks in homeless shelters do have full-time jobs, sometimes several. And so the decompression strategies looked a little bit different depending on where you were in the state. but the community really came together. Then the state came in and said, okay, now we have some resources. How can we help underwrite and sustain this decompression? But what we did also see, unfortunately, in places where there were some concerning outbreaks of COVID-19, the folks in shelters were scared. And I can imagine if you could put yourself in that position, if you understood that someone was sick and it could make you sick as well, you could understand. So many people ended up leaving shelter, and we saw encampments grow. And so encampments are controversial in the ending homelessness movement. There are folks who really talk about the rights of people to live where they want to be. And there are folks who are very concerned with the safety of just creating these encampments. Either way, they're really not a good solution for ending homelessness. But what you see in encampments is essentially this desire, this human desire to create community. Again, back to your work around density, about creating community. So on to my second question, is the lack of affordable housing connected to homelessness? In our state, the answer to that question is definitely yes. As you know, and I'm sure as folks have testified to you over and over, we have a severe lack of affordable rental supply. With a vacancy rate of less than 2%. And, but within that data set that is put out, some of the best data we have actually in our state compared to other states with our residential rental cost survey done by New Hampshire Housing. But within that data set, if you look at folks, how many units we have available for folks who earn 30% and below of area median income, you will find that number is almost close to zero. We almost have no options for people who are on disability or SSI, or might be recovering from or unable to work. And so, yes, the lack of affordable housing in the state of New Hampshire is definitely, unfortunately, connected to homelessness. As I mentioned earlier, you might be surprised that many people, when at a shelter, are working. Last year, I guess, yeah, just around this time, Housing Action New Hampshire was working on a campaign called Our Homes, Our Votes to raise the issue of affordable housing during New Hampshire's presidential primary. And one of our events was a tour of Crossroads Shelter in Portsmouth. And you'll note that people are coming and going to work. They're working at Market Basket and area restaurants and supermarkets. And it's pretty quiet in a shelter that, provides shelter for over 100 people per night. Because people are just going through their workday just like we do. Then finally, this last question around how can the commission help? Well, you're already helping by including homelessness in your work today. So I really thank Senator Fuller Clark for thinking this broadly about the density issue. I know when Housing Action New Hampshire first launched in 2009, we were just very focused on affordable housing development. That's what we were working on, things like the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in our state, and protecting the workforce housing law. However, it was only, I think it was about 2 years in where we really saw the connection to homelessness and really wanted to create a big tent. And we've been talking about affordable housing solutions in a really comprehensive way since then. So talking about affordable housing as a solution to ending homelessness, supportive housing solutions in our state, as well as affordable home ownership. So we've really created this wider lens, and it's because all of these solutions really fit into all of these problems. So you talking about your proposals around density could really help, with affordable home ownership, as well as improve supportive housing in our state. So my request to you on the commission is that in your final report, you consider making the connection between the lack of affordable housing and homelessness in our state. The last point in time count, which is the data set that HUD requires, where you count unsheltered individuals and people living in shelter, was 1,382 at the last count. The Department of Education also puts out a data set their number tends to be double the point in time count, because they're counting kids who are experiencing housing instability, and they could be doubled up with relatives or friends. So that number tends to be over 3,000. I also asked the commission that you consider making policy recommendations that will make it easier to build supportive housing and affordable housing at the local level. I'm specifically talking about House Bills 1629 and 1631 from the last session. These were proposals that came out of the governor's housing task force, and they really just have really important local tools in there, making things like 79E and tax increment financing available to affordable housing developers, findings in fact in writing, and some improved predictability of process, as well as celebration and incentives for those municipalities who are doing the right thing and saying yes to my backyard. We really hope to see this legislation reintroduced in the next session, and I know that your commission making a very specific policy recommendation could help us in our advocacy around those proposals. Housing Action New Hampshire is also a fan of the Housing and Conservation Planning Program. This was a really great program that I believe was 08. There are some folks here who are nodding. Okay, am I getting it right? 2008, and really made a difference with funding and technical assistance at the municipal level to make some really thoughtful planning about what is community, how do we serve everyone, how do we address homelessness in our backyard. So would love to be there to support that should this commission recommend that the legislature take another look at this program. And finally, given the fact that we're going into a budget cycle with a lot less state revenue than normal, we know that our State Housing Trust Fund, the Affordable Housing Fund, that funding will be tempting to move to general operating. Yet it's really important to remember why the legislature decided to put $5 million a year into that fund in the first place. So now is not the time to give up on the affordable housing pipeline. So to the extent that this commission is comfortable with talking about the importance of the Affordable Housing Fund, we'll make sure to waive your report at every hearing that we go to for the rest of the session, whether virtually or in person. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation this morning around homelessness. And I thank you again, Senator Fuller Clark, and members of the commission. I'm happy to take any questions. Oh, are you talking to me? Sorry, let's see. I don't hear you.
Right. Okay.
Oh, there you are.
I unmuted myself.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you if you were able to speak to the issue of eviction and what we're seeing now as a result of COVID and the lack of the HEROES funding going forward.
Again, yes. So thank you. And thanks to Elliot Berry, who's also on your commission, for pointing me to the data set that was on the New Hampshire judiciary. So the good news in a nutshell is that our interventions around housing stabilization during the pandemic are working. Evictions are down or even lower than they have been in prior years. the reasons these interventions include the initial state moratorium on evictions that was issued by Governor Sununu. That moratorium expired at the end of June, just at the launch of the New Hampshire Housing Relief Fund. That was established, a $35 million fund through coronavirus relief funds. And then the CDC, I want to say, maybe was it late August, early September, issued a national moratorium on evictions. There's a test, whether or not a tenant is eligible to meet that, but it does and requires the tenant to, good faith to make payments, to seek all government assistance available, both through New Hampshire Housing Relief and local welfare, and also to submit a sample declaration. But as Elliot and I discussed earlier, or at the end of last week, courts recognize this and are, pretty much limiting evictions. You can still be evicted for, criminal activity and destruction of property and things like that. But the number of cases and the number of writs of possession are decreased and are lower than prior years. I think that's good news, because you can't stay at home and you can't be safe if you're evicted from your home. But one of the interesting outcomes of this is that because we don't have that usual turnover, both through people moving around for jobs and through what is a normal evictions process, there are fewer available units on the market. So you'll hear stories of folks just trying to move from one New Hampshire town to another and finding that there's virtually no rental housing available. And part of that is due to the folks staying at home. From what we understand, the Relief 2 that was recently passed by the House and still being negotiated with the administration also includes an extension of the CDC's moratorium on evictions. So I think that raises a couple of issues. One, to make sure that we're educating both tenants and landlords around these requirements, but also making sure that we have resources available, because landlords still have mortgages and property taxes and capital improvements to make. So we want to make sure that there is assistance available through programs like the New Hampshire Housing Relief Fund to pay rent that they can.
Thank you very much. I'll follow up with just one additional question and then see if there are other questions from members of the commission. And that is, has there been any initiative working with the banks, given that landlords have these obligations going forward vis-a-vis their mortgages, for them to partner by being more supportive, and how might they be more supportive?
So, initially all the federally backed mortgages were given quite a bit of leeway. So not, so some being supportive of landlords who, in the midst of a moratorium. I actually, I don't know what kind of state of play is around how banks are dealing with smaller landlords. And in our state, we do have quite a bit. Perhaps Ben has some perspective on that.
Okay. Other questions
Yeah,
for
Senator, I can address that a little bit if you wish.
Sure.
So looking at New Hampshire Housing's portfolio of multifamily properties, we recognize all of them are federally backed. So we were, we have been very watchful of this in closely monitoring how the properties are managed, and really inquiring of the property owners and the property managers, how are things going? And to date, I'm really happy and relieved to be able to report that none of our properties in our portfolio have requested forbearance under the CARES Act. And I think that reflects the ability of their tenants to continue, for the most part, to continue to pay rent. And we attribute that largely to the action that Congress took in the CARES Act in providing the extended unemployment benefits, which ran through July. So as those have expired and the additional measures that the state agreed to with the federal government to provide some limited additional unemployment benefits, which have now been exhausted, we're really closely watching the rental portfolio in our rental portfolio, just to make sure that the owners have the resources that they need. So I'd say things have been good so far because of the measures that in particular Congress has taken, but that's all ended. So we're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, if you will. With regard to what the local banks are doing, we've heard from the New Hampshire Bankers Association that with their loans that are not federally backed, both the single family mortgages and the commercial mortgages, they're working with their borrowers in some measures that are similar in some regards to what Congress required under the CARES Act for federally backed mortgages, both for single family borrowers and for multifamily borrowers. So they're not legally obliged to do that because these are not federally backed mortgages, and this constitutes, on the single family side, about 1/3 of the mortgages in the state do not have federal backing. But again, we're not seeing a real spike in foreclosure activity among those, which suggests to us that the banks are working with their borrowers, which is a hopeful sign.
Thanks, Ben. That's very, very helpful. And I guess the one
And
thing,
I think Elliot wants to say something too.
sure, okay.
Madam
Yeah,
Chair.
I just wanted to say, to the extent that evictions are relevant to all of this, I think it might be useful just to talk a minute about what eviction activity was like before, in normal times, if anyone can remember back that far. And I just wanted to let, basically over the last few years, you've had about a little over 7,000 eviction actions filed. And of those, in the low 4,000, what they call writs of possession, so the people who were actually forcefully dispossessed. I think between the 7,000 and the low 4,000, you have a lot of people who left before the writ of possession actually issued. So that my guess is you're probably talking about between well, then there's also a significant number of people who leave when they get the eviction notice. So I don't know. I think it's probably safe to say that 7,000 is probably a good number who leave their homes every year as a result of eviction.
Thank you very much, Elliot, for commenting. It just occurred to me that it might be helpful if we were at least to, maybe on behalf of this commission or Ben, in terms of your role with the Hampshire Housing Authority, that we send a letter to thank our delegation for the federal support and to urge them to continue to find a way going forward. So I don't know if it would be possible to craft a letter, and if people think that that would be a useful and important thing for us to do. So are there other questions or comments before we hear from Ben from his point of view? Yes, Jane.
Yeah. Alyssa, do we have names for the homeless? I mean, I live in Manchester and there's several encampments under bridges. And I often wonder who these people are. Do we have names? Can we put names to these homeless individuals and their kids?
But what a thoughtful question, Representative. So one of the, one of the places in homeless services where we need to see some improvement in our state is around street outreach. And I'm really pleased that this emergency solutions grant money that's come through the CARES Act will 1/3 of those funds will be dedicated to expanding street outreach to do exactly what you're saying in a really humane way, and that is put names and provide services to folks. There already are some street outreach teams, but it's really limited here. And we're really hoping to see this work, become more sophisticated and even have some technology with iPads and connection. And so we'll start connecting real people to real services. And I think that, one of the issues around encampments is, one of the things that's a little bit tough to talk about is a lot of people who live there kind of prefer that for a bunch of reasons. They identify that as a safe place. That's where they see that as their family and their community. I remember one individual living in an encampment presenting at a Granite Leaders Leadership Forum saying it was the safest place he had been in his life. He had been severely abused as a young person and gone from, kind of scary situation to scary situation. And I thought, oh my gosh, I never want to hear you say that in a hearing where I'm trying to ask for money, but we do need to acknowledge that some people are making a choice, and even at grave threat to their own health and safety. And so outreach workers are particularly skilled at building trust with this, what you're saying, what's your name, one-on-one, building trust. And there's just these really heartwarming stories about really helping someone move into their apartment for the first time. Often people will choose to sleep on the floor for a long time because they just haven't slept in a bed in a while. But the data, kind of the evidence-based intervention stuff shows that when you do that kind of work with those thoughtful interventions, that it really does work, and people can be safely housed and live more protected lives. So I hope that our state can get to that point with more investment in street outreach. Thank you for the question.
Are there additional questions for Elisa? I do have one additional question, which has to do with, I guess, the demographics. And sometimes there's a sense that our homeless population is concentrated in our larger urban areas. And would you be able to speak a little bit about homelessness throughout the state in terms of not only our cities and larger municipalities, but our smaller communities? What do we know about the spread of homelessness throughout the state?
Thank you so much, Senator Fuller Clark. What I do know based on the annual report is more about family homelessness versus individual homelessness versus veterans homelessness. I can tell you that that the number of families that have experienced homeless has decreased significantly, and also the number of veterans. This can be attributed to very targeted interventions, as we were just discussing. There has been a concerning increase among students who are saying that they're experiencing housing instability. That is up by 12%. And one of the things I think, just being, just having done this work now for about 11 years, is what we see is that homelessness can be very much behind the scenes and almost invisible to a regular community member in, say, a rural part of New Hampshire. It's often perhaps the local police chief who will find a young person shooting baskets at like 5 in the morning and wondering, why. I've heard stories like that. It's that doubled up scenario. And that is not counted, unfortunately, through the HUD point in time count. That's why we make sure to track the Department of Education numbers as well. But it would definitely be a myth to say that homelessness only occurs in New Hampshire's urban areas. That's simply not true. Housing instability and loss of a permanent place to live, happens in the smallest rural town as well as, our state's largest city. I imagine Elliot's had clients, all over the state.
Yeah, if I could just add to that for a moment, the Obviously, homeless shelters are in our largest communities, and so that's where, that's where so many of the homeless folks that are counted end up. But I think to underscore Alyssa's point, there's no doubt that all over the state, people become homeless. And it might be useful, I mean, to the extent that this is important to the group, it might be useful. The Department of Education has in each school district a homeless liaison. And it would be interesting to see, and that's, some of those school districts are small towns or a combination of small towns. It would be interesting to know if you could collect data from which probably exists, from the DOE, from their homeless liaisons. And the other people would, notwithstanding, well, because there are such big numbers in the shelters that do exist, local welfare administrators often end up putting homeless folks in motels. And that will happen again on a town by town basis. And some relatively small places have to do that. So I'm just thinking, I mean, we know it exists. No one, I think, has put together the numbers in terms of smaller municipalities, but it might be, again, to the extent the commission is interested, those are two sources that might be useful.
So Elliot, who would the contact be at the Department of Education to inquire?
The person who I've been in contact a lot, but not for a few years, has been a woman named Linda Thistle Elliott. But I don't, does anybody, Ben, do you know, or Alyssa? I'm not sure she's still there. It's been 3 or 4 years since I've actually spoken to her.
Yeah, I know she used to come to our monthly meetings, but I don't think we've seen her for about 3 years, so I'm not sure. But I can, I can look that up and get back to you, Elliot, for you to bring that back to the commission.
Sure, that would be
Okay,
great.
that would be great. Any other questions? Okay, Ben, it's your turn.
Thank you, Senator. I want to augment some of the things that Alyssa and Elliot talked about with regard to some of the resources that are available, both under COVID through the CARES Act and Gopher, but also more generally speaking for housing and housing development, and then focus on some things where communities can be involved as well. So under the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Relief Fund sent $1.25 billion to New Hampshire. Well aware of this. Alyssa mentioned the Rental Assistance Fund. That's $35 million administered through the Department of Health and Human Services in cooperation with the community action agencies. And that, I think, held some early promise to really help renters in New Hampshire. We are concerned that there has been a relatively slow pace of deployment of those funds, although it does seem to be on the increase a bit. I think the number we were looking at recently, as of September 24th, was 3.3 plus million out of the 35 has been spent, and time is running out on use of funds. So I think in discussing this with Elliot and Alyssa last week, Elliot pointed out that statewide, of the unduplicated inquiries, people asking for information about this program, and who got the application form, only 44% of them statewide have returned the form. And then there's the question of, well, how many of those who have completed the form and submitted it actually get the funding, and it varies from place to place. So this is a concern. The form, I think, initially served as a significant barrier. It was dramatically simplified, which is really helpful. And I think that may speak to why we're seeing the increase in more recent increase in deployment of those funds. And I know Keith is on here too, and he can probably comment about this as well. With regard to other resources under the CARES Act, also the Gopher created a shelter modification program administered by New Hampshire Housing, and we're working closely with Housing Action New Hampshire to work with the shelters to do modifications to their facilities and their operations to account for the impact of COVID. So that's $15 million, and we've been working fast and furious to get the money out to the shelters, but this is the shelters have to apply for this. And this is shelters that existed as of March 1st, 2020. So we've had some really good applications. A couple have pulled their applications. They've withdrawn their applications because they recognized they could not meet the fairly rigid CARES Act deadline of expenditure by the 30th of December of this year, where you're dealing with retrospective application to increased operations. As long as they've documented, that's great. But if they're looking to modify their physical facilities, doing that construction in a couple months period is a real challenge, but they are working really hard on it. So we're really gratified to see the pace of work that the shelters have engaged in the last couple months. And so we have, out of the $15 million we received from Gopher for this, we have allocated about $11 million, give or take, and we have a couple of pending applications too. And then a couple that are, working in progress with municipalities getting their permits. I'm really pleased with the municipal reaction to these efforts. We have seen a high level of cooperation, I'd say in particular from Manchester and Nashua in helping the shelter operators move their permits through, although some are still pending before local boards, planning boards and zoning boards. So they still have to go through the regular permitting, but we're happy with the progress we've seen so far, yet it remains a challenge. With regard to other resources, more generally speaking, I've made a housing presentation before this commission some time ago. I can't remember how long it was, but it was a while back. But just a few things. For very low income people, or generally speaking, low income people, there is a fundamental safety net program. It's the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is rental support for people who get a voucher, assuming they can get one, they qualify based on income. And then they have to, once they were awarded a voucher, they have to find a landlord who is willing to accept that voucher. And in an environment where we have an under 2% vacancy rate, there are, in normal times, a lot of landlords who say, nah, I don't want to bother with this. I don't need a voucher tenant. I've got plenty of tenants who are eagerly vying for these apartments. Yet, in the past few months, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of inquiries from landlords who are interested in the voucher program who previously were not. And why is that? Because they recognize that the voucher program is in fact a regular source of income for them. It is backed by the federal government. So as long as the federal government remains operational, and sometimes that has been a question for us, then the money will flow through the voucher program, through us and through other public housing agencies directly to the landlords to support the rent that is charged to the tenants. So we're seeing that increase, which is really promising, and we hope that continues, not in parallel with COVID. We hope that goes away, but we're really hopeful for the ongoing interest of landlords in the voucher program. There's another type of voucher program, and Alyssa, without naming it, kind of mentioned this, the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Vouchers, which operates in a very similar fashion and is targeted to veterans. And that has been a really important bulwark against homelessness among the state's veteran population. Other resources that we use for housing is housing development funds. So continuing on with the the veterans theme. We've worked with a couple of different providers, housing developers, to build housing for veterans. So most recently, Boulder Point in Plymouth is a veterans home using federal funds, including support through the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Voucher Program. Alyssa mentioned the state Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is administered by New Hampshire Housing. We do this on behalf of the state. And that is the sole source of funding that the state provides to the construction financing of low-income rental housing development. And from its inception in 1988, the legislature had made a couple of allocations over a 30-year period totaling something like $15 or $16 million, which when you average that out isn't a whole lot of money. And when you look at the cost of development, it's not a whole lot of money. But in the current budget, the legislature took a significant step forward in addition to making a one-time $5 million appropriation to the Affordable Housing Fund. Also, starting this calendar year, has devoted the first $5 million out of the real estate transfer tax to the Affordable Housing Fund on an annual ongoing basis. This is an extremely important measure. And that's what Alyssa was talking about in terms of defending that, that allocation against the pressures that the legislature surely will be experiencing in the next in negotiations on the next biennial budget to pull back anything that's not going to the general fund. This is the time when the construction of low-income affordable housing is most important. We have an extraordinarily low vacancy rate statewide, including places like Coos County, yes, but all over the state, a low vacancy rate, high costs that we have documented. As Alyssa said, the residential rental housing survey that we do, New Hampshire Housing does annually, shows the inexorable increases in rental costs statewide over time. It's just not stopping. Even during recession, during the Great Recession, rental costs continued to go up, and that's not changed. So in times of recession, that's a really important time to continue funding the development of affordable housing. One, because it's needed. People need the places to live so that they don't become homeless. And it's also really important for the construction industry. These are projects that continue to employ a lot of people at times when they might not have jobs in construction elsewhere. And then once they're up and operating, they employ people in running the properties as well. I promised that I would talk a little bit about community involvement. There is an existing program that was pretty closely modeled on the Housing and Conservation Planning Program called the Municipal Technical Assistance Program. This is funded by New Hampshire Housing, and we provide the funding to Plan New Hampshire, which is a nonprofit statewide organization that works with design professionals to do a lot of different things. They're famous for their design charrettes and that are, avidly sought by municipalities to do, particular projects on particular properties in the municipalities, and they need some professional help to get that done. But recognizing the scope of work of Plan New Hampshire, we, a number of years ago, identified them as the best candidate to administer this program. So we provide them with, upwards of $100,000 a year to make grants to municipalities to do work on their regulations that will help to make them more housing friendly, if you will. So the zoning ordinances, the subdivision regulations, the site plan regulations, and other associated regulations. And we've had pretty good success with that. We have recently worked with Plan New Hampshire to retool the qualifying criteria so that the cash match, which I think was a barrier for, in particular, a lot of smaller communities, has been changed to allow for in-kind match. So the volunteer work of local board members or the existing staff time of people like Andrew in Chester, that can be counted as in-kind match toward the match requirements. So grants are available to municipalities to do this hard work at the local level. With regard to advocacy at the local level, New Hampshire Housing also provides directly grants to municipalities and other nonprofit organizations working locally of $5,000, up to $5,000 to do community engagement and outreach on housing issues. So, Andrew talked about the difficulty of the Chestertown meeting in 2020. It's really the object of this mini grant program is to provide resources to municipalities like Chester to engage their community so that there is a counter message, a factual message, one that is going to work against the passionate disinformation campaigns that we see so frequently in social media and elsewhere. So that's a lot of the stuff I wanted to talk about. I will give you a really quick preview. We have a new housing market report that will be coming out, I think, this week. I have a copy on my desk right now that I'm editing. But there are a couple of things that I want to point out in this, just to give you a preview of it. One of the things that we've been focusing on is the purchase market in New Hampshire. And we've talked a lot today about the rental market. The purchase market, we've been, if you read the headlines, you read the stories under the headlines, you see that there is a real boom right now across the country, but here as well in New Hampshire in home purchases, where we're seeing people with means choosing to relocate. And we've read the stories about New York City depopulating, which is not really true. A small portion of people who have lived in New York City have chosen to leave, but that small number of people in relative terms leaving New York City can have a big impact on a small community because it's just the numbers. So it doesn't have not going to have a huge impact on the New York metro area, but it could have a big impact on the leafy suburbs in Connecticut. We're also seeing the impact here in New Hampshire as some people have chosen to leave the Boston metro area and move into the farther reaches of New Hampshire. I've heard anecdotally from realtors and from potential would-be purchasers in the North Country being outbid repeatedly on home purchase efforts by cash buyers from away. So this activity is having an impact on our market. So we started to look at, well, where are these people coming from? So we acquire data here at New Hampshire Housing that reveals that. And what we're finding is that, yes, from out of state, the bulk of home purchasers coming to New Hampshire are coming from Massachusetts, but they're also coming from, obviously other places in New England, Maine, and Connecticut and Rhode Island, some from Vermont, but then also the mid-Atlantic states, so New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania, Virginia. But interestingly, we're seeing among the top 10 origin states of people coming from away are Florida, Texas, Colorado, Arizona, and California. Now, California, Texas, and Florida, they have enormous populations, so a small number of people from those places can have an impact on New Hampshire. But it's just interesting to see how that is happening. Chris, you had a question?
Yeah, Ben, you have additional information on those people that are moving here, demographics, what types of occupations they have, family size?
We don't have that. That's not unfortunately not part of the data that is available to us. But I will point out, and we have this in our upcoming housing market report, a commentary by a Carsey Institute researcher by the name of Christine Bunshu. She has worked they're on a report that was issued by Carsey recently, and she has written a column for us in our housing market report on what they're characterizing as the top 10 reasons to stay in or move to New Hampshire. So it doesn't directly answer your question, Chris, but it is an indicator of what are the motivators for people to stay here or to move to New Hampshire. Number one is family. So there's a family connection here in New Hampshire. That's what's keeping people here. That's what's inducing people to move to or back to New Hampshire. The second is the natural environment, and then quality of life and employment. So a job in particular. Those are the things that are driving people to stay in New Hampshire or to move to New Hampshire. There are others too, the tax profile of New Hampshire, culture and lifestyle, the economy. Those are significant factors as well. But the top ones are family, natural environment, quality of life, and either existing job or job prospects. So that report will be coming out again, I hope later this week, and I'll make sure that we send a link to it to the commission members. Elliot, did you have a question?
I have a question, which is what do we know about people's now ability to work remotely so that it's easier for them to move to new places? And we know we still have areas in the state where we don't have broadband, but it seems to me that that is allowing for greater mobility. I don't know if you could comment on that.
We don't have really good data on that, but it's something that we know is a driving factor in the location choices that people are making. That is, those people who have the ability to make a choice. And that means the financial wherewithal. So for people who are moving from another state, who are making significant down payments or are cash buyers, for the most part, they're going to be choosing places that they know are going to have reliable high-speed internet access, broadband. And that is really a reflection of the desire to work remotely. Not everyone has that need. And so we see some high-end buyers in places like in Coos County where they don't have good internet access, but that's not what's motivating those buyers. But those are, I would say, a decreasing proportion of the people who are moving. Increasingly, we're seeing people who are choosing places because of the existence of broadband. And so the communities that have it are going to be the ones who are, in effect, winning out in this bidding war for buyers. The communities that don't have it are going to be left by the wayside. So I think this is, it's important, and the state has recognized this. And Chris's tile's turned off right now, so I'm not sure if he's still there, but BEA has worked really hard on broadband initiatives. And Chris, I think you had mentioned the possibility of having Carol Miller make a presentation on this very issue.
We can certainly do that. Time is getting short, but we can.
So one other question that I have is, are we beginning to see any conversion of office space or mall space into housing?
Senator, that's an excellent question. I think we are starting to see some of that happening. So I'll give you the town of Newmarket as an example, home to the Fox Run Mall, which is a dying mall. Newington, I'm sorry. And the Newington Planning Board hired consultants not too long ago to help them analyze this question. What are we going to do? And although it's not owned by the town, what are we going to do with the Fox Run Mall? And so I think those consultants have completed their work and made a report to the planning board. And really what the municipality can do is to change the zoning to allow for more creativity in market response in use of those properties and use of those structures if they remain, or demo those structures and replace them with something else that is more productive. And this is coming full circle to the first thing you asked me about, Senator, and that is the presentation by Joe Minicozy on the 15th. This is the kind of thing that he talks about. What is the, from a municipal perspective, what is the best long-term utility of different kinds of land uses? And what his work again and again reveals is that it's the downtown small scale mixed use, mixed income developments. You know, the pizza joint with a couple of apartments above it that yield the best bang for the tax buck for municipalities, not the big box mall type properties.
So I also just wanted to add to that, I know the discussion in Newington was, well, what would this do to our school population? And I think they've recognized that, you know, have been very dependent on keeping their low tax rates because of income coming in from the property taxes for the Fox Run Mall, which is now declining. And there was a very fruitful discussion about, you know, that actually the community was willing to support an increase in elementary school population because they recognized the need. They also recognized that if we were going to develop additional housing, that it would probably be 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom housing so that you wouldn't be seeing large families moving in. So then I think going forward, we need to pay attention to, we are seeing many smaller families. And so that's just, but I think it would be an interesting case study because we've had so much discussion about communities worrying about what was going to happen to their school populations if you increased housing. And so I just wanted to highlight that.
That's an excellent point, Senator. And one thing I would add to this is that there was recently, and I think it was in the Union Leader, a column about residential development in the town of Merrimack, where they're experiencing something of a boom in the establishment of new residential units. And one of the concerns that has been raised is, as you pointed out, is the impact on the schools. So they're looking at something on the order of 1,200 new or 1,000 new residential units in Merrimack. And among those 1,000, or maybe actually it's more like 1,600 units, among those units, they're anticipating an influx of 200 to 300 students to their schools. And a member of the local legislative body or local governing body, I think it's Board of Selectmen in Merrimack, I can't remember if it's town council, said, well, you know, the school district is going to have to plan for that. Well, so I went online and looked at Merrimack School District enrollment, which over the past 10 years has declined by 1,200 pupils. And so my thought was the strategy might be to fill the empty seats they have existing in the schools. And as a result, because of stabilizing their average daily enrollment, they would get more money from the state as part of the state's grant through the municipalities. You know, communities with declining school enrollments get less money from the state, and yet their capital costs are fixed, and they're not getting money from the state for that purpose.
So it would be good to respond to that article, right?
Well, my immediate response was somewhat visceral, but
okay. Other questions for Ben? We have about 7 minutes left. Yes, Elliot.
Ben, one type of housing you didn't mention, which I think is particularly useful or has a lot of potential for more rural communities, is manufactured housing. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that, and more specifically, whether you have any idea what the degree of compliance is with the current law about manufactured housing and zoning.
So Elliot, this is a great question. From what I can tell, and I've not done a systematic analysis of this, but anytime I've looked at a local zoning ordinance, I see that they are doing one thing or another in compliance with the law. Under state law, municipalities are required to allow manufactured housing, which we traditionally know as mobile homes, but the legal term is manufactured housing. That is these housing that is built on a permanent chassis according to HUD standards, not the building code, but HUD standards. So municipalities are required to allow manufactured housing on single lots or in manufactured housing parks or in manufactured housing subdivisions. And generally speaking, anytime I've gone looking for it in a zoning ordinance, I've found one of those three extant in the ordinance. So they are complying with the letter of the law. There may be other barriers in the way that of doing that the municipality may erect, but I think from a regulatory standpoint, for the most part, from what I can see, is they're doing that. Manufactured housing has come a very, very long way from our traditional perceptions of what it was, in the 50s and 60s. The enactment of federal standards on their construction was a really important measure, and that was 1974, I think. What is being built and placed today is by far and away a much superior thing, and than what we saw before, and they do tend to maintain their value over time now in a way that they didn't before, and we've seen evidence of that, notwithstanding the traditional conventional wisdom that they depreciate rapidly. New manufactured housing does not. It maintains its value.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just take a minute to talk about, we have 3 meetings left, and is there a priority of how you would like, we really only have 2 meetings left to collect additional data. Is there a priority of where we should go? I had a list of potential possibilities. We talked about a panel from developers. We talked about the Municipal Association. We talked about Professor England, maybe updating his report that we never heard from. And then if there are other suggestions, those are the 3 that I pulled out. Was just wondering what the commission would like to do over these next 2 meetings.
Senator, I did get a communication from Cordell Johnston of the Municipal Association. He sometimes tunes into these, and so he heard NHMA invoked, and he was asking whether there was an expectation that they would be making a presentation. I think that he or someone else from NHMA would be prepared to. I did tell him it wouldn't be today, but I did suggest it might be next week.
Okay, well, that would be great. I think given, that we have the issue of how to work with municipalities and what the Municipal Association could do to help get out the kind of information that we would like to have shared with the municipalities, that's a good suggestion. Anything else?
Yes, Senator Clark, this is Representative Dolan.
Yes.
One of the things that I had been thinking about is doing a transition of theoretical to practical, or theoretical to reality. And as part of that, I was thinking that in your final report, that we could maybe take an inventory of good examples of making use of higher density developments across the state, maybe a half a dozen or a dozen examples that communities could use as something to reflect on and say, gee, I'd like to do, or we should do a development or a high density development like they did in Merrimack or like they did in Portsmouth or whatever. And so it gives regional and community planners something more than the maybe the good intentions of the committee, but actually some hard examples of, let's go get a copy of the plans and see if it fits our community type of thing. I think that might, maybe if it's a 10-step process, maybe that takes us through up to step 7 and accelerates some of these developments. So just as a thought that maybe we could get an inventory of good high density projects that could serve as examples.
I think that's a very excellent suggestion. I'm not quite sure how we put those examples together, but I can talk with Noah and Ben and anyone else who has an example that they want to recommend. That would be great. I think that's a really good idea. Jen, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up quickly. I know in the past we've had the presentations from the regional planning commissions. There's been conversation about the existing targeted block grant funding and what it would take to actually do what is in state statute. So I know the directors and I have been working, Sylvia and I, the other RPC directors, have been working on just kind of putting a number together that we'll be reviewing at our meeting Thursday morning, and then happy to bring that back to you all. I don't know that it warrants a full presentation, but perhaps a few minutes to just kind of discuss that or a rough number.
That would be great. And then the other question we had was whether we wanted to hear from Peter Francesi and Elaine Merrill, not Elaine Merrill, but Lorraine Merrill. And I don't know, Ben, if you know where they're at in terms of their finalizing their initiative.
The book is published, and the film, the accompanying film by Jay Childs, who did the first film, Communities and Consequences, will screen on NHPTV on, I think, the 22nd of October, and I can get that information to folks.
Okay, so maybe we could pair them, if it's possible, next week with the Municipal Association.
Senator, if you like, I can reach out both to Cordell and to Peter and Lorraine to see if they'd be able to do something.
That would be excellent, either next week or the week after, and then we're done. Any other suggestions? I know we need to leave, but
I would still like to put in a plug for Ben trying to get some developers to talk. I think
so
that's
if we
come
could-
up repeatedly, and I think that's still kind of missing from the
so
conversation.
no, let's say if we could put those two presenters that we just talked about next week, and then if we could get a developer forum the following week,
Yeah.
that would be great.
Great.
And then we'll spend the last session. I will look at the best way to fashion the report going forward and hopefully be able to get out a draft of that ahead of time for everyone to look at, so we can move that forward and meet the November 1st deadline. Thank you all very, very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate the hard work that everybody has done to make this such a fruitful conversation. Now we need to make sure that we can move forward. Thank you.
We just have to motion to adjourn and then go through the call to a roll call to adjourn, Senator. Sorry.
Okay, and there might be a couple of people that are on that we didn't pick up before, so I don't know how to deal with that, because we had 21, 22 people. When we took the roll call, we had about 16 or 14. So
Shanna joined.
Yeah, I was
So
later.
Shanna, for the record, where are you and who's with you?
Yes, thank you. Shanna Saunders, City of Rochester. I'm in my office alone.
Thank you.
I don't think there's anyone. Okay, so let's have a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Noah. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very much, Jane. And then we'll call the roll.
Andrew?
Aye. Andrew Haddock, aye.
Chris Nato?
Aye.
Jen Sis?
Aye.
Keith Tebow?
Aye.
Elliot Berry?
Aye.
Representative Beaulieu?
Aye.
Shanna Saunders?
Aye.
Noah Hodgetts?
Aye.
Chris Way?
Aye.
Representative Dolan,
Aye.
Ben Frost votes aye, Senator Fuller Clark.
I vote aye. We're finished for today. Thank you so very,
Thank you.
very much.
For everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.